We're live.
Erhard, welcome everybody. This is Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is May Day. Happy May Day. Happy first of May.
Your two favorite committee members are here on time,
I
promptly
am
ready
so
to go.
proud of the three of us, given all that's happening in the world, that we are able to be here on time, and two of our favorite legislative council as well. I am deeply grateful. Thank you. I would just like to say, as we begin to talk about the landlord tenant bill, that actually what is also being proposed and hopefully considered, and this is hopeful because it's not yet on paper, but the hope is to, at this point in session, pass out a much slimmed down version of the landlord tenant bill, that we are looking at addressing the most challenging tenants that are challenging both for tenants and for landlords. And so that the threatening tenants, I would call them first. The second is no trespass, and the third is setting up a housing diversion court, a study to look at that and to work with the court to figure out what that would cost, whether we do another court like we do mental health court, drug court, or DUI court, or whether we set up something more substantive or substantial. So those are the three big pieces we're working on, trying to slim down the landlord tenant bill. I would be delighted if we're able to do that. So that I just wanted to fill people in on that's the hope, sort of as we move forward to get that accomplished. But Erhard, I know you worked on these issues for a long time. We honor your work, and introduce yourself and take it away. You have 10 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair. Really appreciate the time on the committee's agenda. Good morning, Senators. For the record, Erhard Matka, currently retired, but was the former director of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition, and as Madam Chair mentioned, spent many years, probably 25 years, at the State House, and was involved in pretty much every every substantial change to landlord-tenant law during that time. Also, as I think some of you know, I retired from my last job working for our esteemed Senator Bernie Sanders as a housing policy advisor as well as outreach representative. I appreciate your introduction, Madam Chair, with the update. I did take a look at draft 2.1 that is currently in judiciary. Understand that your committee doesn't actually have possession of the bill.
I would speak to issues, not the bill at the moment, because A, we don't know what it looks like, and B, we don't have it in front of us. So,
Gotcha.
I mean, we're working through the bill, but there's no particular version at the moment.
Okay. And yeah, what I'm encouraged by what you said by way of introduction, Madam Chair. I will say that what I saw in judiciary still had, from my perspective, a long way to go.
But that's why I addressed what we're hoping for.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So just maybe for table setting, and I'm sure you've heard this from some of this from others before, and at this point in the session, you're probably beyond broader statements around H772, but I just want to make sure that it's clear that as it came over to you from the House, I find this bill seriously imbalanced in favor of landlord rights, and a bill that substantially erodes due process protections for tenants and upsets what has been a 30+ year balance between landlord and tenant rights, excuse me, and responsibilities. And as I think others have noticed, would seriously exacerbate homelessness in our state, which already has one of the highest rates of homelessness in the country. So I'm encouraged that the Senate looks to be drastically scaling back the bill, because if not, I would seriously hope, with one major exception, which you mentioned, Madam Chair, that the bill would die in the Senate again, unless it is seriously scaled back, and that if it's not seriously scaled back, that you maybe take this up again next year and really engage all of the stakeholders from the beginning, and really hear both sides, because I think maybe not so much in your committee, but I know having followed this closely in the House, there was really a preponderance of landlord input into the bill. Um, so as I think you all know, to produce a bill that seriously balanced landlord and or further balanced landlord or tenant rights while you're increasing protections and expediting evictions. There's a whole number of other tenant friendly protections that I would hope that you would consider in the future. One obviously being the complete elimination of no cause evictions, which is something that the city of Burlington has passed as a charter change and that I worked on locally to to get passed locally and then also passed the state house, which unfortunately the governor vetoed a couple of years ago, and the House was unable to override. There are many other tenant protection measures that I think would reduce evictions and reduce homelessness in the state. Rent stabilization, legal right to representation of tenants in eviction cases, limiting 1 month's security deposits to 1 month's rent in advance, um, more
Yeah.
greater enforcement of minimum habitability inspections and so forth. I also am really encouraged to hear that you're potentially looking at creation of either a landlord-tenant court or a specialized court
That
docket.
is, that is
Um,
our hope. That is
yeah,
certainly one of the things the Senate would like to contribute to this bill.
yeah. I've always argued that the timelines that are in current statute, are they're not the problem. The problem is the court process gets delayed,
Correct.
and the court docket, especially still, I think we're a couple of years past COVID, but the judiciary really suffered from the court docket just being overloaded and during COVID and just being further delayed. So I think, some of what you may have heard from landlords about delays and the need for speedier evictions, I think could be resolved through a specialized court docket. So I'm very happy to see that you're looking at that. However, there are also, landlords complain about problem tenancies and the need to evict folks. There are many measures, and some of them you've already taken that could seriously help landlords that do rent to what, for want of a better term, might be considered risky or challenging tenants. One is increasing funding for rental arrearages, increasing funding for state rental assistance, increasing funding for landlord-tenant education and outreach, which is provided by both CVOEO, Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, as well as by the Landlord Association. Increased funding for landlord liaison services. I know you're in a restricted appropriations environment. Once again, you've got property tax, uh, education tax to deal with, but these are things that really could help those landlords who rent to tenants that they might otherwise consider risky or challenging, and help prevent evictions. I think eviction prevention is really what you want to focus on mostly.
Yes,
I'll just
I agree. We need to certainly work on prevention, which happily is one of the pieces in this bill
yeah.
and one of the pieces that's actually made it through the budget, the $1 million in the rental assistance to make sure we can cure rental challenges before they get to the point of being eviction. So actually one of the major pieces of spending from our committees has been that $1 million.
And that's great. There's certainly more that can be done, appropriations wise. One of the things that was discussed for many years and has never really been implemented is a statewide landlord risk pool, which I think would go a long ways towards enhancing some of the protections that landlords, might be able to take advantage of when there's extensive damage to property and/or many months of rent owed. And I should hasten to add that in my experience, it wasn't just as an advocate at the State House. I served for 30 years on the board of Northgate Housing, which is still the largest affordable housing development in the state. And on that board during my tenure, we had to unfortunately evict tenants. It is a reality that landlords face. So definitely seen this issue from both sides, but like you said, Madam Chair, the focus should be on prevention.
Yeah,
The other thing that I would say, we've heard from landlord complaints needing a speedier eviction process that they might take rental units offline, which of course we want to avoid during our continuing chronic shortage of safe, decent, and affordable rental housing, or possibly convert them to short-term rentals. I mean, I think there are a number of measures that you could consider, obviously not this year, but in future years. You could increase or create tax or other incentives for landlords that keep their rent low, rent to low-income tenants, households on Section 8, measures that encourage long-term tenancies, and so forth. And I'll also note, appreciate that you folks are not totally up on the budget, but I know that there's been a consistent effort to increase the Vermont Housing Investment Program, which helps bring units back online that have
yeah,
been substandard or
exactly. Well,
or vacant in the past. So I encourage that.
thank
I
you.
do have some very specific comments, and I'm
And
mindful of
I
the
would
time.
like to
So
give you 2 minutes, Erhard, and if you want, you can also send those to us. We would always appreciate your input.
yeah.
And want to email them to us, that would also be great.
Appreciate that, and I'm glad to see that you are focusing on situations that are extreme. I know Chris Donnelly and other nonprofits have been in to testify. I I I've seen these situations firsthand from times when I've done property management directly. Also, due to the issues that I'm sure you've read about at Decker Towers, at Brilliant Housing Authority, toured that and understand, met with tenants there and understand
I would
those
say
problems.
Decker Towers was really was eye-opening for many of us. We had a joint hearing with Judiciary
Yeah,
maybe 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years.
yeah.
That was
When I was still working for Bernie, I gathered the other housing folks from the other two offices, and we met with tenants there. We met with management, and serious, the problems were very, very egregious. So I encourage you to work on that. I will say a couple things. One is
I need you, if you can, to incorporate those into written testimony.
okay.
And because we have a legislative council on an extremely short uh time short time frame.
Yeah.
And if you would be kind enough to send us those specific comments, that would be really helpful. Stay
Okay.
engaged, as you know, this isn't disappearing. And thank you for your comments. We're really grateful to have you weigh in. And I have to turn now to Cameron.
Okay, I can do that. I can send you something early next week. I know you're in the waning days, so
That would be great. And good luck with your dear spouse.
thanks so much. Appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's
Have-
okay. Thank
Thanks
you
for the
so
time.
much.
Have a
Yeah.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, Cameron, we're gonna pivot from the landlord tenant bill, which we're gonna return to later in the morning. Are we returning to it late? No, we're not. We're now gonna pivot to the housing bill, H 775, because we have not looked at the bill with all of its inclusions. And first, I'd like to say thank you to Daphne, who's filling in for Kiara today. Really helpful to have you here today, and very grateful. Thank you. And so,
Would you
great.
like me to take it away?
Cameron, it's yours.
Okay, for the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm gonna walk through a draft 2.2 of a strike all amendment to 775. Before I get started, I think this is the first time I'm doing a full walkthrough of the amendment. I think I've mentioned this previously. Just as a reminder, what I've done is I've taken what you all passed in 328 and then taken what the House General and Housing Committee passed in 775. And which I choose, it's just them, what the House passed, 775, we've kind of combined those two into this document. I've kept, that's the requests of the chair, kept certain sections that were in 328. You remember both bills were addressing housing targets and municipal plans. The housing element of a municipal plan requiring those municipal plans to include certain language about housing targets. We've gone with the Senate version of that language. In some other instances, I've incorporated some of the changes that the House General Committee has made to 328 as present. So I will highlight those things as we walk through. Yes, sir.
Those being your questions, how much in 328 have they now synchronized that same language with yours?
Okay. So I'm going to start walking through, and Daphne just sent a request to share. And then I will try to be succinct, but feel free to.
Well, and it's not like this is gonna be the end.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, so first piece, we have the Service Supported Housing Advisory Council. This was in 328. It was not in 775, so we brought that in. Not much has changed. If you recall, this is the council created for identifying how to, here on sub A, increase alignment between human services programs and policies serving individuals who receive Medicaid funded development disability services. This is kind of building upon the work that your study committee did. Just
And we actually, the good news is we have the money has got flown from the House to the Senate to the House.
Okay.
Back to that. So we're,
the only the change here.
Right.
We've added in, or the House is wanting to add in this section. It's at the request of the advocates. And it's a section that says when VHCB requests, then the advisory council that's being created here would provide advice to VHCB regarding the expenditure of funds for the production of permanently affordable housing units for individuals who are eligible to receive Medicaid funded development disability services. So just allowing VHCB to request the advisory council's advice on expenditure of their funds to support this populations. And then in the annual report, there's an annual report from this advisory council. There's the inclusion of recommendation for future legislative action. This is going to be on page 3.
Yeah.
Adding in and funding sources. So my understanding from the advocates, this is one of the most challenging pieces.
Yeah.
Is how do you find dedicated funding sources? And so this is adding in to say, if the advisory council wants to recommend a dedicated funding source or funding stream, then that can be included in the annual report. And then that lines 17 and 18, who are eligible to receive Medicaid funded development disability services, is just a cleanup from the version that came out of the Senate to make sure that it's using the same terminology that's used above. And then lastly, I added in this provision in 2D. It's an annual report from the council. There's no sunset on the council, so ensuring that the report will not sunset. The report is expected to go right on.
and they are hoping that their work will be so well incorporated that they will be able to dissolve after 600 at least units of housing and service supported housing are built.
Did they leave that section of 328 that's going back to us?
That language, everything that's there is in 328 as it passed the House General Committee and started. Yep. Page 4, the state.
And if you'll
treasurer-
also remember that VHCB, as we go through this, VHCB is a critically important partner on this. They have also found, as you may recall, some additional money that may be able to be used this year as a result of changes in the HUD eligibility requirements. It liberates some money that could be spent on exactly this kind of housing. So we're looking at actually being able to continue the pilot and working with that, which is great.
Page 4, moving into section 2, we're talking about the state treasurer's credit facility now. And what you have here is this version is what passed out of your committee in 328. So it only includes the increase to 12.5. It doesn't include the 1% for offsite. It doesn't include the offsite pilot program that was in 775. Those provisions are in 328 as it was passed out of House General. So it includes that 1% and offsite accelerator pilot program, but they're not here.
So we have it may those we'll see what happens in the House because it's, it's in Ways and Means.
Yes, ma'am.
This, after, and I can't remember if Alex spoke to this on the record, but a couple of things have happened with that offsite accelerator. First of all, no one owned that pilot. No one really, that wasn't any one particular person's baby or department. It was a little bit of an orphan. And as we looked at it, it just struck us, and that it was maybe not ready for prime time. It's a great idea, but it needs to be owned. And the other piece was that Alex Farrell's department, the Department of Housing and Community Development, just literally didn't have the time to take this on. And given the cuts, sadly, in staffing, I would point that out as well, just lost capacity. They are working, as we all know, on 802 homes, which is also a pilot. And that work we look forward to seeing the results of. But this, I'm feeling so naked without my earrings. That is what's also led to pulling the offsite accelerator and the additional 1% facility. And Peter may speak briefly to this, but I believe that the treasurer, that if needed, if something came up, that the funds are flexible enough so that they could be applied to some whatever kind of project might crop up in the intervening 8 months that we're not meeting.
There's nothing that stops the treasurer's office from utilizing this
Right.
credit facility to purchase offsite construction.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you.
there's one
So
other,
are people okay with that? The pulling the offsite accelerator and that a lot of you were very concerned about the risk with the 1%. Yeah, okay, great.
one other quick technical change on page 5, it's highlighted here. When you look at this section about the credit facilities.
Yeah.
In D, it says that annually the treasurer shall submit a report detailing activities of the credit facilities established in subsection C, which is credit facilities regarding climate resiliency, climate infrastructure and resiliency project. So we're just striking that. So now they would be required to provide that information on all of the credit facilities.
Right.
That's what they're doing. So
Right.
this is more
This
just a
reflects-
technical
So this reflects reality.
separate fix.
Great.
Okay, now we're moving into the Vermont Economic Development Authority. This language was in 328. Believe.
What was in our bill too? Oh, it got amended for.
Right, I believe it was in 328.
Yeah.
I believe it was in both, but there was
But we
some
fixed it.
concern
Yeah.
about making sure the language was articulating exactly what the parties wanted. This is for VITA and VHFA working together to allow VITA to utilize their funds to support multi-unit housing development. So we've tweaked the language a little bit here to clarify the intent of those two entities. So what you have is, with deference to VHFA, on applications that are eligible for financing from both the authority and the agency, the Economic Development Agency can fund multi-unit housing developments of 5 or more units when requested and jointly financed with a financing lender, except they cannot finance portions or phases, that's an inclusion there, portions or phases of a multi-unit housing development that VHFA determines is being primarily developed for occupancy by persons and families of low and moderate income. The point here was to make it explicitly clear that if it is an area that is being developed that's designed for low and moderate income individuals, that's the purview of VHFA and not the Economic Development Authority. So the authority shall not finance those portions or phases of multi-unit projects that should be under the purview of VHFA.
This is, we just remind people that this is an additional housing opportunity for all housing, particularly
Opens
for
up
high.
more money.
Yeah, more money in terms of more loads.
Yep.
And, but in partnership with what VHFA is doing. So this is what they have worked out together and.
And this is the language that is now in both bills because it's been supported by both VITA and VHFA.
So,
Okay. On to page 7. These next two sections are entirely new. We haven't discussed this, or you haven't seen this language at this
but
point.
we have heard the testimony from Maura Collins
Yeah.
about why this is needed.
Yeah, so this is about the Vermont Housing Finance Agency's rental housing revolving loan program. This was a program that was created back in 2023. At the time it was created, it was put in session law. It was not put in statute. And I think the reason is that there's the language in the bill that's created the program about they're not required to implement the program if funding wasn't provided. So I'm assuming at the time there was a question about whether or not the program is actually going to be funded.
Right.
And that's why it was in session law and not put in statute. At this point, the program has been funded. They have issued loans out of the program. And it is a revolving fund. So it is intended to go on presumably into perpetuity. So it was amended last year in Act 69.
Yeah.
And the request is to amend it again this year. So the first thing that I'm doing here is I'm putting the program in statute.
Right.
Because at this point, that's where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And so section 4 is articulating that it is the intent of this next section to codify in statute the rental housing revolving loan program.
Right.
And then last sentence, loans issued through the program prior to July 1 of 2026, when the language would go in statute, shall remain in effect in accordance with the executed terms and conditions. We're not trying to, question anything that's been done. We're simply transitioning everything over into statutory language. So then you get to section 5, where I'm adding this under the Vermont Housing Finance Agency chapter in Title 10. All of the language remains the same as the program was created, except the two minor amendments, the two amendments that were requested by Maura last week.
Right, which, as you'll recall, enables housing developers to use tax credits, which will mean they can access, well, they'll be eligible if they, phrase is better, that they will be able to extend more, drop the income eligibility and create more housing for more lower income Vermonters with this tax credit.
So what you see here on page 8, line 8, currently.
That was really clumsily, sorry.
That's right. Currently, the program is designed where it has to be 2 or more units. At least 25% of the units have to be affordable to a household earning. Current language is.
So where are you now?
Page 8, line 8.
Yeah.
Affordable to a household earning between 65
Right.
and 150% of the applicable area median income. So you have a floor there. A household that's earning 40% of area median income, the program wouldn't be designed to build housing for those individuals. It is intended more for the phrase in the program is middle income housing. When you look up here at sub A, it says the purpose of the program is rental housing developments that serve middle income households. So you are changing that to say instead of between 65 and 150, it just says up to 150.
Right. So it was between 65 and.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
And so then later, and when you get into sub 4A here, on the bottom of the same page, this is what is the maximum amount of loan that will be authorized, and it shall not exceed the lesser of, and then you have different calculations here. One of the calculations is 150,000 per unit for each unit that is affordable to a household, and it was earning between 65 and 80. So you're removing that lower threshold again. So it would be.
So we're
up to
enabling.
80. You're enabling them to fund projects that serve
Lower income.
lower income individuals as opposed to the floor where it was designed for middle income households.
Well, it still can be for middle income, but it opens up more opportunity for lower income.
Yes, ma'am. Correct. Okay, those are the 2 changes that were requested by VHFA. There's another change. So everything here that you see that's not highlighted, this is all keeping the language as it currently exists, as the program currently was designed.
Right.
And then you get to the very end of this section on page 11, subsection E. There was a requirement for an annual report. And what we've done is we've simply
Incorporated, yeah.
incorporated that into the annual audit report that they're required to provide to you every year. So as opposed to two reports, let's keep it all together, consolidate it into their annual. Right, that's the change there. Now we get to VHIP. There were changes in 775 as it came out of the house. This was not in 328. It allows the department to advance funding at the beginning of a project. When a project is being renovated through the VHIP program, currently it's on a reimbursement basis. This would allow them to upfront the money for the project. That was
We
in
have talked about
775.
that, yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
The change here, and this is in 328 as well, is last year you all added in an annual report for the VHIP program. We did not put a date on when that annual report needed to be submitted.
Oh.
So we're simply adding a date, November 15th. Okay, so that's the bottom of page 12 and 13. Page 13, we're moving to special assessment bonds. This was in 775. It was initially not in 328. I think John has walked through this with you all.
Right, and we had to do a fix that
There
we
was
remember. We had John and Michael gone in last week, or was it earlier this week?
Earlier this week.
It's just a blame.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so
So page, when you
that's what this is, just to remind everybody.
page 13, section 7 is the bonding piece. No changes to that section. When you get to the next, there's a section 7A and a section 7B where I've incorporated the changes that John and Mr. Gahn were discussing the other day.
And you'll recall this enables us to use special assessment funds for sort of more sequentially so that we don't exclude the opportunity. If you use a special assessment fund, it doesn't exclude your ability to access CHIP or TIF. So this enables it to be either more sequential or possibly all at the same time. So it's, yeah, we never envisioned it being mixed, one or the other.
So those are the two changes based on the testimony and the request that you all had earlier this week.
Right?
Now we get into section 8 on page 15. This is regarding municipal plans, these next few sections. Municipal plans, municipal zoning. You recall this is where in the housing element of a municipal plan, looking at page 16 here, housing element of a municipal plan shall include an analysis of regulatory physical constraint preventing the development, redevelopment, or rehabilitation of sufficient housing to meet the housing needs and targets. This is the version of the language that you all passed in previous 775 passed language as well. Theirs was different. This is the version that you passed in 328, and this is the version that currently exists in 328 now.
Yeah, they incorporated it.
They went with your language, and this was the language that was supported by the regional planning commissions.
Right. Perfect.
Okay. Municipal zoning. Now I will just pause here and say, these are not my areas. These are Ellen's areas, but I can just at least comment on what they are because it's all of the language that you passed in 328. No changes.
Right.
So first off, on page 17, this is the amendment that you all did on the floor regarding areas served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure. There were some changes to that definition that you made. Taking out the word state regulation or permit. That remains. It was in 328. It was not in 775. So you were incorporating that back in. No changes from what you passed earlier this year. Then when you move to page 19, we have in section 10, this is where there are year-round residential development, you're adding in manufactured housing into the list of, permitted housing types, if you will. So that was in both. It was in, I believe it's in actually 757, but it was also in 328. So we're keeping it here.
Yeah.
Then you get to the next page, page 20, where you made some additional changes here, changing an allowed use to a permitted use. And then where there's a district served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure, that allows residential development, striking the ability of the municipality to require more than 4 dwelling units. So this is all just bringing back in what we've done in 328. The highlighted language here on 11 and 12 is new. So this is scrolling up to page 19. This is notwithstanding existing law, the following land development provisions apply in every municipality. And this is a restriction to say that no bylaw of the municipality shall require a duplex or multi-unit dwelling with 3 units to be constructed on an owner-occupied lot.
Where did this come from?
This was a request of Senator Roberts.
So this is new to this bill.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you want me to
Yeah, sure,
speak
Casey.
to this or?
Yeah.
So actually, when I first read this, I was worried it was like the opposite of what I was trying to do. It's like, it's a little hard to read and understand the intent. Can you hear me? Am I okay?
We're hearing you
Okay.
better.
Okay. But this essentially says we want more ADUs and duplexes to be built in densely populated areas, regardless of whether or not the owner occupies the property. When many ADUs and other types of ancillary units that are affordable tend to get built by the owner when it is owner occupied. But it is an encumbrance for them to sell the property if the next purchaser does not plan to live in one of those units. So I have been in ADU meetings in Burlington and have heard about the same phenomenon in Brattleboro, where half the people walk out of the room. I literally experienced this. Half the people walk out of the room when they learn that if they want to build an ADU, they have to have it be owner occupied into perpetuity. That's almost impossible to achieve. So this would essentially allow more of the units we hope would be built through VHIP and ADU permitted use to be built without an encumbrance.
I'm sorry, but ADUs using public taxpayer money does at the moment require an ADU to be owner occupied. This is 3 units or less, but 3 units or more, which is slightly larger than just adding a single ADU onto a house or into a house or on top of a garage apartment. And so maybe we could work on language that separated out less than 3 units would be required with public taxpayer dollars, because we're trying to create long-term housing. There's no guarantee that that'll be primary housing. And that's very important I think for all of us, it's protectors of the public tax, of the public purse, to ensure that any units that are created using VHIP money are used for permanent residence or long-term rentals.
But
So
what we could say is we could either say into the perpetuity of the grant or loan, or we could say through the first owner, but it becomes a problem, a liability when they go to sell that property if the next person is required to live under the same condition.
Right, and I think we have competing goods there, then I think we could figure that out, and I think we just need language with Cameron to clarify that, because this is in the VHIP section, yes.
But for example, in Burlington, where a lot of these ADUs might be built, or even a duplex ADU, which is why we get up to 3 units, the Burlington requires that a rental be 30 days or longer. They already meet our existing definition of a long-term rental. More communities could layer on top of our building incentives their own municipal regulations about short-term versus long-term rentals. And then we would achieve our policy goal.
Right, well, let's work on this, because I think if, we need to clarify if they're using VHIT money, that it's limited to the length of the lien or the loan repayment or the grant, but I think if they're
The
using,
forgivable loan.
we need to limit the, we can certainly put a time frame in, but I think it needs to be, I think we need to clarify that. So let's just keep working on that piece, and, but I think on the whole, this is a good idea.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Keep going, because I know we're losing Cam in 3 minutes.
Yes, okay, so the next section is the Reader Assistance Heading State Community Investment Program. This is making the tweaks to the downtown and village centers under this program. If you all recall, this was in 328, it was not in 775, so we're bringing this right back in with no changes.
Yeah,
Now, common interest community report. This was in 328, so it's still here. And it would require the two amendments to the report overall. So
that's right. What page you on?
I'm on page 22.
Yeah.
The bottom of page 22. So the report requires our office, as it came out of this committee, said outlining, this on line 18, outlining any legal issues related to requiring common interest communities to authorize leasing, authorize commercial purposes, etc. On the House side, there was a request to add in outlining legal, conventional financing and funding compliance issues related to requiring common interest communities. And so I'm okay with that language, but, to be clear, I'm an attorney, not a banker. So I'll be reaching out to externals to ask them what are some of those financing limitations. And then I would just be incorporating those into the report the best I can. So
That would be.
wanting to make sure I'm clear on what the end product is going to be.
Luckily, you have lots of experts
receive.
around.
No doubt. And then on page 23, lines 3 and 4, incorporating in the Bill 537, if you remember, came over to you. It was about common interest communities and requiring the installation of vegetable gardens. You've incorporated that into the report here.
It's another common interest community discussion, and we thought that Cam could incorporate that.
So this report is in 328 currently. It just doesn't include this subdivision report.
Right?
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
I know Ken has to go, but were we comfortable with that vegetable bill requirement?
We weren't, I don't think we were comfortable with it as a standalone. And so because we knew he was undertaking this study of common interest communities, this fit into that
Oh, so this is
study.
part of
This is just adding it to the report.
Yeah, the results may be positive or negative.
Yeah.
My bad, this knows.
But I think it belongs in, as we're looking at all the issues, that this is one of the issues, and thank you to the House for identifying.
Yeah, we can study vegetable gardens. We can't study limited access highways. It's just a note.
Did they strip?
Yeah,
Just,
yeah,
just,
yeah,
Was that a back in?
yeah. Gardens, vegetable gardens are one for.
they're all important because you have to get what you grow in your vegetable garden to market on 22A.
Okay, the last one is the farm worker housing report that you all included. And there were some changes requested by the Vermont Housing Conservation Board on the House side. So I've incorporated them here. They're highlighted. So it's on or before January 15th, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board shall submit a written report to the General Assembly with information on the progress made towards meeting the goals identified in the farm worker housing needs assessment. I think their concerns were, as the language initially came out, they were concerned that they would have to do the report again or somehow, file, kind of an amended report. And the request here is to submit information about progress made to the recommendations that were in the report that they initially did. Right.
Yeah.
Is there a unique reason why we
And
have,
so this,
Wait a minute, David's asking a question.
okay,
to call out this specifically? Can we get an annual housing report that has multiple categories?
Yes, but this, and I don't remember why this was called out, but we'd have to have GHCB.
it was
in.
natural resources.
Yeah.
So,
and-
okay. Do you want me to answer that, or? So when Natural Resources, amended our bill on the floor, they originally wanted to have the farm worker housing piece in, to get the update as well. I mean, I don't know. I think it should probably go to agriculture and us, but they wanted to focus on that language, and I honored that. But I think VHCB understands my intent that I explained in our committee, you know, as this was first passing, that going forward, we also, we look at all on-farm housing as a public good. There were a lot of farmers who do not have farm workers and need to build an ADU or a small dwelling unit for themselves or their family. And we should also care about that because farmers often don't make a lot of money. So I think they understand my intent, and what I'm trying to make sure I understand is in the past, looking at the past, we'll keep using the farm worker language for what is coming to us. And in the future, we will start to use on-farm housing as our description.
That's the last change I will comment, just why farm workers
Yeah.
highlighted. It initially said on farm housing, now it says farm worker housing.
Right.
And Madam Chair, with your permission.
Yeah.
I will vacate the chair because.
Yes. So more to follow, and we're gonna shift gears. Thank you, Cameron. We gotten through it. Effective date is the only thing we didn't get to, and that is 2026, July 1.
Yes, ma'am.
So, thank you.
And I will be
And
back later this morning.
Right. thank you. You know, who's this from? Like, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you know, everybody's right.
Yeah.
So, fascinating. So I gave you the sister
Yes, I
state.
got it. Thank you.
Okay, so that gives you all the countries, the sister cities, if you feel like mentioning. And
One of the issues, of course, is whether military arrangements will constitute sister states in the same term, and were they actually blessed?
I would agree about it.
I'm not aware.
I would just say,
I don't think that. The issue is, but just back to on farm housing, which second related to. Why? Not inclusive in that sense.
That's what I'm right. Looking forward out there.
that's a pleasure.
I don't know where.
Thank you.
They are coming to the office.
On that.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Keisha, are you coming in or are you staying remote?
You will see me walk by the window in a second. I'm here.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, we're going to start. We've had, Keisha has asked that we consider amendments to CHIP. As you know, I have challenges with this because our process had been in agreement with the Betsy, who asked for this in January, testimony from Jessica asking for no changes. The House and the Senate agreed to no changes to CHIP for the first year of its operation. It's only been alive for 3 months, and the guidelines have only been in place for 5. So this is a request to open up CHIP and to make these amendments. So I think we are reviewing, at least listening and hearing what the amendments are and what their implications are. Here she is. So if you want to just begin with an overview of what these amendments are, and then we'll have John walk through them. We have until 10 o'clock.
Okay.
And so if you begin with what they accomplish and who they're accomplishing them for,
So
that would be great.
yes, so on my way in, I think I heard there was already a CHIP/TIF technical.
No,
fix
there's
in
a
the
special assessment. There is a special assessment improvement. That is not opening up the CHIP program. So don't build on that. That's not being.
Well, it now makes any technical fixes germane. So that I don't necessarily feel the compunction to talk about why it's relevant in a housing bill to make the kinds of changes to CHIP that allow housing projects to take advantage of CHIP this construction season. I hope Jessica will confirm, or Betsy. I asked Abby Duke if she would come.
Do we have the John's language?
These are known technical issues to the rollout of the CHIP program that when the dust settled on the conference committee at the end of last session, it was very clear that we had incongruency in the law that would make it hard for large housing projects to take advantage of the CHIP program. They have the attorneys involved, the developers, the municipality have all been relaying this to Betsy since last summer. I respect Jessica and Betsy greatly. They did Herculean work to get the guidance out and follow the intent of our final conference committee agreement, but it left some technical holes that, if not addressed, will stop large housing projects from taking advantage of CHIP this construction season. So with that, I'm happy to have John walk through them. I can't think of my goal with any housing bill is to get housing bill as quickly as possible under the intentions that we had. The other thing I would say is I started a conversation with Senate Finance about the definition of a non-primary residence and the definition of a long-term rental, because those need to be congruent everywhere in the law. We can't constantly change what those definitions are in different places and expect people to comply. And that's exactly what would be happening if we passed the House Ways and Means version of H 955. Yesterday, we voted on H 933. It has largely the definition of non-primary residence that came out of this committee, with one technical change for bona fide landlord relationships for the one that LLC we think might have rented to itself. But that is the definition that we created for what a non-primary residence is. If we keep getting changes in other areas of the law for what a non-primary residence or long-term rental is, our laws become incongruent and hard to follow, and we should care about that. So with that, these are the technical changes to CHIP that are now germane to the bill.
Maybe that is a decision for this committee. Special assessments are something we approve and work on. Special assessments are different.
It's a decision for the whole
It's a decision for the committee. So, John, take it away.
Hello, John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. It is a beautiful Friday morning here.
It is.
Let's do it.
We can
My
all
daughter
agree on that.
said, my son came back. It's very cute.
It's very nice this morning, Fabian. Okay, I'm going to walk through 3 short pages with some changes. I'm going to try to describe what I take them to be accomplishing. I will also try to remind you, to the extent that I can, of how CHIP works. I hope that much of that is fresh in your mind because of how recently CHIP was passed, but I also know that this has not been a subject of discussion up to this point. So I realize that a lot of this may be unfamiliar.
Or just need to be reminded.
Exactly. So CHIP broadly is a special kind of tax increment financing program, right? And you can think of it, TIF districts are a larger geographic area. CHIP proposals have an analog to TIF districts, which is a site in which you set the OTV, you determine the growth in property value, and then you retain an increment from that, the revenues from that growth, particular percentage, some of it goes to the ad fund. You retain a particular percentage and you use that to finance improvements. That's the definition you see here. CHIP, which is what we were looking at, the analog to the TIF district, is the housing development site. It's the parcel or parcels on which a housing development that is stimulated by the construction of infrastructural improvements happens. So the housing development site is the discrete site where the OTV is set. You have the increase in property values, hopefully, and you receive an increment on that basis to finance the cost of the improvements. You may recall that the improvements themselves, which are infrastructural improvements, may occur off the housing development site, but the idea is that they stimulate the growth of that housing development. That is high level what CHIP does, and we can talk more about some of the details as we go through, but it's particularly relevant to the first change that you see here. So this is the definition of improvements, which is a definition in CHIP. It's also a definition in TIP, but this is specific to CHIP. And you can see that the first line of this improvements means the installation, construction, or reconstruction of infrastructure. I'm just going to pause there. The improvements are infrastructure, right? There is sub B, which speaks to a technical piece related to funding debt service interest payments. That's because at the start of a project, right, you might have insufficient increment to actually cover those first financing costs. That's not touched here, just reminding you that that's in this piece.
Can I pause to make, is this online?
It is now. It is. Now.
It's post,
Okay. I think a lot of people wanna.
I think Daphne posted it 3 minutes ago or so.
Okay.
So it just fun. So improvements under CHIP has a particular purpose of requirement. So I'm going to talk about the existing law. So that'll be me ignoring the strike through and the underline, right? So under current law, there's a purpose constraint, the installation, construction, or reconstruction of infrastructure that will serve a public good and fulfill the purpose stated in section 1907. So the purpose, you'll recall, for CHIP that's stated in 1907 is to encourage the development of primary residences for households of low and moderate income across both rural and urban areas of Vermont that would not be created but for the improvements. So put simply, encourage the development of primary residences for low and moderate income Vermonters. The thing to note about that existing law definition is that it requires a two-part check. It's not just the check on section 1907. It's also this broader construct of that will serve a public good. That's why you have an and between the two, right? It's that will serve a public good and fulfill the purpose stated in section 1907. This was certainly a subject of discussion during the conference committee and last year. And this was something that came up during the guidance. So if you are interested, I can flip to the guidance that CHIP released that speaks to, so you can maybe see part of some of the thinking around this.
why don't you do that after we go
Okay.
through all the amendments? And then we can go look at the
Sure.
guidance as it currently exists.
So that's existing law. The change that you see here is to strike the and fulfill, right? It removes the and condition. And basically what this is saying is, I'll just read it through and then say what I take it to do. Installation, construction, or reconstruction of infrastructure that will serve a public good by fulfilling the purpose stated in section 1907. The way you can think of this, instead of having the dual check, it encourages the development of primary residence for low and moderate income and fulfills some public good. It says the public good is served, is met by fulfilling the purpose of the section. So it makes it a single check. You just look to 1907, you say, did this encourage the development of low and moderate income housing? Then you're satisfied. So it removes a double check and says, just look to the purpose. That's the only purpose constraint on the improvements. That is the first change.
Okay.
Okay. Scrolling down to related costs. And before I read this again, I'm going to try to remind you of what we're talking about here. Under tax increment financing programs, tax increment can only be applied to certain kinds of things. The classic thing you would most expect is the financing, right? You're covering the cost of financing. You take on debt, you cover that with the increment. But it can also cover some other things. So one is if you could make a direct payment to the project to just outright reduce the costs and therefore potentially lower the cost of financing. That's something you could do with the increment. The last thing that you could do with the increment, so financing, direct payment on the project. The last thing that you can use increment to cover are related costs. So related costs are the sorts of things that you might expect not to be captured by bonding for capital purposes, right? And I'm just going to read through what you see here. Related costs means, and again, I'm going to ignore the new language and just talk about existing law, means expenses incurred and paid by a municipality exclusive of the actual cost of constructing and financing improvements that are directly related to the creation and implementation of the municipality's housing infrastructure project, including reimbursement of sums previously advanced. We can talk about the other pieces here, but basically it's things outside of the direct cost of constructing and financing, but they are directly related to implementing the project itself. It could be personnel costs, maybe design, certain other things you might not expect to be captured in the indebtedness. So
Yes, Tom.
Thank you for doing this language, and I definitely like all of the emails I'm getting. This one, I have a question about, concern about approving self-healing. Is this going to open the can of worms that if a sponsor developer can charge whatever they so want, then submit that bill to be reimbursed from these public funds without a controller or check by the municipality? Do you see an opportunity for exploitation?
I think let me first say what the language does, and then I will try to answer your question. So the language change is related costs means expenses incurred and paid by a municipality, sponsor, or developer. So it's adding to the bucket of related costs that could be covered by increment, those incurred by the sponsor or developer. This does expand what you can apply the increment to. It does expand it to include costs that those sponsors or developers, it could be the same person, incur outside of the actual construction cost. I can't anticipate what sorts of things they might try to charge as related costs. Again, at the end of this, I can flip to the CHIP guidelines,
Yeah.
which I haven't thought through a lot, but we can just pull them up to see the sorts of things. They have a list of sort of examples of kinds of related costs, and maybe it will be helpful to look at that list just to see what might be covered. But
The
the
approval.
drive,
Let's
Sorry.
just, yeah, I suggest we finish this and then let's do that, because then we can compare.
I just want to know who would approve the sponsor developer related costs, or the municipality, Pepsi, or are they just self-approving whatever they spend on the project? But
Oh, that's it, yeah, it's a good question.
yeah, the municipality is not approving these in any
Yeah, who approves?
independent way. I have not had a lot of time to think about this, but I would hope, I guess hope is maybe a bad word to use. The tax increment financing plan that you have to submit to create the project should account for the sorts of things that you're applying the increment to. And so I think you might reasonably expect that the tax increment financing plan, which does need to go out at least on notice to the public. They wouldn't have, as you know, the vote provisions are a little different for CHIP than for TIP, because for TIP districts, it's always the muni bonding. And so there's always a vote on the bonding here. For CHIP, because the sponsor can take on the financing, that doesn't require a public vote, but there are notice provisions, including that the tax increment financing plan would go out. And you might, I think you would expect that these sorts of costs to show up in the tax increment financing plan. I don't readily know how it would work in practice, but that is just my quick guess as to how it would.
And when I think of like the auditor coming into finance and saying funds were commingled or pulled from the wrong pot, et cetera, I think this would make it more transparent and they would have access to more information about who's incurred what cost. It wouldn't have it like a lump sum.
Happy to help.
Municipality.
Potentially add additional costs, so. Is that correct?
They could add additional costs to the project.
And presumably there are requirements, will be.
We can always have Tim,
Right.
Tim Ash come in and weigh in.
Well, I think, and what it's saying is, you know, if it was just the municipality, often they have to do a public engagement process or something like that. And this could mean that the developer pays that cost instead. Because the whole predication of CHIP is that we finally have developers who will partner with the community when there's no capital upfront.
Right, but this enables expenses that would normally be incurred by the municipality to be
The whole
this
CHIP program.
opens this up considerably to allow related costs to it means that the developer will and the sponsor will be able to keep more of that and
Not
Yeah.
keep more of that.
use more of it.
We'll talk
Yeah,
more
we
about
will
what
talk-
the guidelines are,
let's keep
what
go-
is included and what kinds of costs are
Exactly.
appropriated, how they're
Let's-
stamped and audited, but that's.
Let's keep moving because we just have another 25 minutes.
So that is the change to related costs. Speaking of the struck municipalities throughout here, I think this is just what you would expect to be struck when you're expanding to include the sponsor development. So
Right.
directly related to the creation and implementation of the housing infrastructure project, you could actually leave the municipalities there. It doesn't really matter. We know what you're talking about. And then you can see the obvious reason you would strike the language on 16, including reimbursement of sums previously advanced by the municipality. In this case, because you're expanding to include sponsor development, it could include reimbursement of sums previously advanced by both the sponsor or developer,
Right.
instead of just the municipality.
If you've actually been close to the TIF process, which I was in Burlington, the city extracted money from the developer to pay for their attorney costs, their public engagement process, et cetera. And this would actually just do a better accounting of all the money that was spent to develop the project. Otherwise, there's a lot of, I would say, more informal agreements where municipalities take the money from the developer to use without that being considered
It
fully.
Well, it just means, it also means that the developer would keep those related costs to pay for what they were directly paying for.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that could happen. It could result in just a shifting of the
Exactly.
way that costs are covered.
Right.
It could also expand the kinds of things that are covered, but it depends.
Right, for the
The
developer,
questions that
it's
will
not.
help you to answer this are really empirical rather than.
Right.
Right.
And it's a transparency.
Let's keep going.
Okay, page 2, we are now shifting to the housing infrastructure agreement. You will recall that this is the agreement, the contract that memorializes the arrangement between the municipalities, the sponsor, and the developer. And it may be that the developer and sponsor are the same entity. In fact, in most cases, they might be. So this is the contract, and this is where a number of conditions are included related to sort of core purpose of the program, including importantly what you see in subdivision 4 here on line 9. So again, I'm going to start with existing language and we'll talk about the changes. So in the housing infrastructure agreement, what you see is that it shall provide that any housing unit within the housing development, that's what's stimulated by the improvements financed through CHIP, provide that any housing unit within that development be offered exclusively as a primary residence till all indebtedness for the housing infrastructure project of which the development is part has been retired. And it gives a condition on how you would show that on a regular basis. It says condition shall be satisfied by biennially providing a landlord certificate or homestead declaration. So just to sum it up quickly, it's saying that for the duration of the CHIP project, housing units can only be offered as primary residences. I'm sure you'll recall the discussions around this at the end of last year during the conference committee. There were folks who wanted this to be in perpetuity. There were folks who wanted no restriction on primary residence, thinking that you're just trying to generate housing. So the compromise that was arrived at in the conference committee, as I recall it, was this until all indebtedness is retired. The new condition that you see here on line 10.
So it was a balance between in perpetuity and not at all.
Sure. Provide that any housing unit within the housing development offered by a sponsor be offered exclusively as a primary residence. So what this is saying is the restriction essentially would not apply to any downstream purchasers. Under the current CHIP program, you would expect, I think, covenants or sort of conditions to be created at the point of transfer such that no one could offer, keyword is offer, residence as anything of it other than exclusively as a primary residence. With this new addition, the sponsor, who presumably is owning the housing development in the first instance, is required to offer the housing units exclusively as a primary residence, but at the point that someone purchases it, that condition would go away and they would have the option of selling not as a primary residence.
But the other thing we should take into account, if we create a definition of what an ongoing non-primary residence is that person themselves could have a sick family member in another state or something like that and decide to use their own home as a non-primary residence. And we shouldn't be interfering in that decision. And the developer has no ability to interfere, so it's not enforceable.
However, this enables a sponsor or developer to simply flip a.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't, not with our definition of what a property transfer tax primary residence is.
We'd have to review that. But my understanding of this, as I look at it, is that it shortcuts, creates a loophole for moving out of having a primary residence, which is what we're using public taxpayer dollars for, to create more full-time residencies for our
We're looking to
Vermonters.
create housing units. And
We're
we can't
creating
control
housing
how a
units for
person
full-time Vermonters
uses
with
their home.
public money. I think we need to look at this closely. This is not a technical change. This is a major change and is something that needs much consideration. Looking at the purpose of why we spend public taxpayer dollars.
It's a
on these
technical
kinds of
change in that
It
the
is not a
developer cannot control what happens to the unit after they sell. Betsy would probably tell you the same thing. Unless we're looking in people's windows, we're looking through their tax filings in the future. There's no way to enforce the uncarefully written language from the conference committee.
Perhaps. Let's keep moving.
So that is the change there. I'm going to skip over this 6 now and I will come back to it in just a second because it's going to make more sense after I go over the next section. If you would like me to Read it how I can, but I think it'll make more
Yeah,
sense.
I think, yeah.
So I'm gonna go to page 3. This is amending the section, describing the tax increments for the CHIP program. And you'll see here that the existing language is describing uses of tax increments. We've already talked a bit about this, the application exclusively to financing, related costs, and direct payment on the projects. What this says is that a municipality may apply tax increment pertaining pursuant to the subchapter to debt incurred within the period that you're financing, to related costs, and to the direct payment of the cost of the housing infrastructure project. We've already talked about that. So that's your core, that's your uses of tax increments. And then it describes some particular conditions related to these. So a municipality may provide tax increment to a sponsor only upon receipt of an invoice for payment of the financing. And the sponsor has to confirm to the muni once that tax increment has been applied to the financing. So that's one of the checks on ensuring that the increment is going to the permissible purpose, right? It's being applied directly to the financing. Any direct payment shall be subject to the same public vote provisions as applied to debt. So that's an option that the municipality likes to take. They need to vote on providing that directly. And you might imagine that that would be presumably less of a concern for voters, because presumably it reduces the cost of taking on the bond in the first instance. The new language that you have in front of you says that a municipality may provide tax increment to a sponsor as a reimbursement of taxes already paid, or as a credit against taxes due and payable. I will try to describe what I take this to mean. So as I understand it, this is intended to fit within the existing uses, meaning the sponsor is allowed to apply the increment exclusively to financing, and it's trying to describe the form that the payment would take to the municipality. So instead of the form of a payment that is then applied to the financing, they essentially just receive a tax credit that reduces their tax liability. I will say that I struggle a little bit with this one because I understand the sort of economic argument that money is fungible, and in providing money in the form of a credit, you reduce the cost for the sponsor and therefore presumably reduce the cost of financing the project, or maybe the money arrives in a different way that's advantageous to the sponsor. I don't know. But it's harder for me to see how that is applied to the financing, right? If you're providing a credit that reduces their liability, it could be that they end up with the same amount in dollars, right, that you would have provided as a payment. But I don't see how it's applied to financing. It's in the form of a credit. So,
But is that a piece of the stackable understanding of what, as we look to how we finance these huge projects?
I think it's kind of a policy question as to how you want to promote. Yeah, exactly. I do want to note that the word financing is a technical definition under CHIP, and it means essentially debt. So I just want to make sure we don't equivocate and say, you know, this will reduce the cost of financing the project, and that means you're actually lowering what would be taken on in debt, when the point here is that you only apply the increment to the debt. That said, it's easy to
What would you do with that? Is there a specific purpose or benefit?
I don't know. I don't know.
No, so you don't, it was not explained to you by whoever asked this.
No. But on all of these, it's likely helpful to hear from the advocates as to how on the ground this impacts them. But this is one where, yeah, I just don't understand how it fits with the application to the increment, but I sort of get the economic argument that you're just providing payment in a different form. I would suggest that if this is the route we go, we would need to learn more about.
Right.
Yeah, how that works.
And Thomas, and then I explained to John how this fits into 6 on the page before.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
Okay, Thomas.
No, please continue with that. I want to go back to the previous point there.
Yeah, so 6 says that the housing infrastructure agreement should describe how the municipality will provide tax increment to a sponsor. It is tied to that request for providing it in the form of the tax credit. It's basically saying, memorialize in the contract the kinds of ways that you could pay out the increment, and it could be that you're providing it under this language in the form of a credit or reimbursement for taxes paid. Under the reimbursement for taxes paid, there's likely something technical that I am missing. I would sort of assume that that you wouldn't need to describe reimbursement for taxes paid because you could just provide the tax increment. So that's one I just think you would need to think a lot more about how it works. But those are the changes, and I know that Senator Chin had a question.
Can I go back to the previous point on the enforceability of primary residence for individual? I was not in the committee of conference, but I'm wondering if in your discussions last year, I take the concern that this could be sold initially and then just flipped and then it used as like a vacation home or ski home. We don't want public dollars used for that. I still think we're building houses that won't pay taxes, so it's not the end of the world. But did you discuss some deed covenants or liens or other ways to enshrine in because this is new housing, to put it, because those things are pretty darn effective. If it's something in the deed that this has to be used as who enforces it is a secondary consideration. But if it's in the deed as such, somebody thinks something was violated, that would have any owner in the future have to abide by it, otherwise bear.
So bear with me because this is,
It's unclear. I think we have
Well,
to hear that sort of.
it's unclear also because of our own actions this year. So if we have set a definition of a non-primary residence in the property transfer tax language, that is, in my mind, the first place we have that three-part definition. Okay. I like that definition. But the one that passed yesterday in H933. What is coming to us in H955 changes the definition of a non-primary residence and then requires that a lister try to determine with somebody if the use that year beyond the owner who's sharing their landlord certificate or their homestead declaration requires that someone verify whether or not in that year it's being used as a primary or non-primary residence. Now, I gave you the definition that we've used already in law because that's incredibly hard and invasive to achieve. It creates a whole new definition of what's considered a long-term rental or a non-primary residence that is not predicated on what the taxpayer provides you, which is a landlord certificate or a homestead declaration. So if we are going, again, I've said this all session, if we are looking in people's windows to see how they're using their home, that's the only way you could enforce a primary residence definition that meets the new ways and means definition that they have forwarded, which I disagree with. That's in 955.
Enforcement is one thing, but I think people want to do and abide by the laws.
Right.
Did you come up with that you could potentially require that the deeds of this new housing be that this?
So what I don't know if this showed up in any of the conversations John has had, but the alternative approach is we basically said, I mean, this is where the more we try to define things, the worse we are off. We said at least 40% of the project has to be housing, right? The developers and attorneys are trying to say the other 60%, does that need to be a laundromat or could that be non-primary residences? We shouldn't push for commercial development in the other 60% of a project when our intent was to get the 40% to be housing. That could be housing, a coffee shop, and a flexible number of non-primary residences after sold. Now, what I will say as a passionate housing policy expert is also that the more dense you make the housing, the less likely you are to get non-primary residences that are continually used as luxury spec-in homes. You have people who might age, they might move to Wake Robin and rent their place out, etc. But you need to let people make their own life decisions privately. And a developer and a municipality cannot enforce a bona fide non-primary residence into perpetuity, which is what the language was last year, that the house thought, and that no housing provider could enforce.
So I'd really love to have you go to the guidelines so that we can look at these requests in context with what exists at the moment.
Yep, happy to do that. And to your question, Senator Chin, that was the discussion was related to deed restrictions and covenants. And I would just note that the restriction is for offering exclusively is the condition. I am not an expert in this area to know how people built this in, but that is the restriction, and that was certainly what came up during the conference with me. But some of this we might see in the guidelines, so I'm going to flip to this. So So there's a bunch of things here. This was something that Betsy quite quickly put together and got out for that November 15th deadline. You'll
Well, they had a
recall.
whole task force. I mean, it wasn't, I mean, I'd say it was actually very thoughtful.
Sorry, I didn't mean that to suggest
It
that.
wasn't
it was
just
a-
quick. I mean, they had a whole task force dedicated to this and it took several months.
Yep.
So
I meant to say that they responded quickly to
Yeah.
the,
I
To
would
the-
say, Pepsi stood up a new program in this state in an incredible time frame.
Sure.
We asked a lot of them. They stood it up very fast and we have it up and running. It's been up and running since January. That is incredible. We seldom see programs set up that quickly that are this important, this quickly. So I
Well,
just,
because we
I would-
know people want to take advantage of it for this construction season, while there's other housing exemptions in place that we passed. And I would add, they are doing their best to be, to achieve fidelity to what we passed. And they have known for several months, and I'd be happy for them to characterize this themselves, that this is a non-enforceable component of the bill. And they sort of wanted to just see how the projects come forward and figure out how to deal with it. But that's not good policy and that's our fault.
I'm not sure it's not good policy. I support primary residence with public dollars. So I think they tread that line and I think they did a good job. And I think that, this is one of the reasons.
They
we
didn't
want
do
to-
anything. They met the spirit of our law.
Yes. So Thomas and John,
Okay.
we could walk through. So some of the changes, it's just good to just see what the current law is.
Yeah, so the things I really wanted to point to are pieces that are related to the language that you had in front of you. You'll recall that one of the first, I think it was the first piece I walked through in the new language was related to the definition of improvements. And I talked about that dual check, fulfill a public good and the purpose of the subchapter, right? And so the current chip guidelines that you see from November reflect that public good piece. You are likely asking the question, what is that? So I just wanted to point to the way that Pepsi cast this out in the guidance. I can read the full of this, but I think it's most helpful to look to the third. So public good will be considered met for improvements that directly support the housing development and are publicly owned and publicly accessible. That's sort of intuitive. Privately owned and publicly accessible. So they could be privately owned, but potentially there's public good there.
A water system or even a sewer system.
And then, as you can imagine, applying kind of the most strict or critical eye to something that is both privately owned and privately accessible, asking the question, what is an independent public good for that beyond what the purpose of the subchapter is? Here's the way that that's described it. Privately owned and privately accessible improvements may be eligible so long as they can demonstrate a community benefit from the CHIP supported infrastructure project. The municipality shall articulate with evidence how the community needs or desires the planned improvements and that they are mutually beneficial for the municipality and developer, i.e. private sector systems or development in a community that does not have a municipal wastewater system, and or the cost of connecting the development to an existing system would be cost prohibitive for the developer and town. If we wanted to explore this more, I would encourage you to obviously talk with folks at Pepsi, but I just wanted you to see the kind of ways that folks were thinking about having a dual check here. The new language is to say the purpose of the subchapter is sufficient if you have encouraged the development of primary residence for low and moderate income Vermonters, then you've met the test for what an improvement needs to do. So that's the first piece I wanted to just show you. There's a bunch of things on this page. I'm trying to make sure I hit the pieces that as you can see here, what kinds of improvements are. I don't think we have to go through this, but they're classic infrastructural pieces. Related costs. This is the other big one I want to show you. So under the current law, related costs that you can apply tax increment to, those are exclusively as incurred by the municipality. This is where Senator Brock had some questions about how that would work. And I think it's largely an empirical question, but just to get a sense of what kinds of related costs are, you can see them here. Costs incurred by the municipality sponsor and or developer associated with the creation, implementation, and administration of the CHIP site. Eligible related costs include, it's not limited to these, costs of plans, studies, or reports specific to preparing that plan, finance plan application, any amendments, costs of providing public notification and obtaining any public approvals, costs such as consulting, design, architects, engineering, accounting, legal, project management, or legal discussed earlier.
Who approves of law?
The municipality, the Pepsi?
So the related cost would be built into your increment financing plan,
Which is approved by Pepsi.
which is, it is approved by Pepsi. So
Pepsi.
increment financing, yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't get the direct answer earlier. In part, it's me. I've been out of this space for some time, so trying to recall all the,
So even if the sponsor developer has a cost, it would ultimately go before Pepsi and they would have the ability to say yay or nay.
yeah, and I think there's a question as to, let's say something minor came up during your process. Would it constitute a substantive change that requires amendment
Okay.
of your financing plan? Because if it didn't require an amendment of your financing plan, then the change that you made wouldn't go to Pepsi for approval, right? So you could imagine that maybe there's a way for incredibly minor, I don't know, but you could speculate that minor changes that might not rise to the level of necessitating a financing plan change wouldn't require some independent approval.
I know we're running out of time, Madam Chair. I just want to say, I don't know if this was injected in this conversation, but I'm really glad we're taking this on because we have emails from people on the ground trying to.
I have
use
not
CHIP.
had a single email.
Oh, I forwarded it to you if you
Well,
want.
they haven't sent them to me. So,
It's just this week, but I'm just saying, they are saying these are the types of things that we need to. make
and
CHIP
who's
work.
they?
Yeah.
I understand it's
Stephanie-
Let's Build Homes and Hula.
Stephanie Hayden.
She is Stephanie Clark. She
Yeah.
works for Whitenburg.
Yeah.
I know who she is. Thank
She's listening right now.
Okay, great. I'm
She's
glad
happy
she
to.
is. I'm sure everybody.
testify.
Hi, everybody. John, could you just finish going through this thing?
Sure.
And then we're gonna take a break.
I would love to point something out in the language we passed last year that points out the way we try to make it clear that we are not enforcing by changing people's dwelling use over and over again. We wrote into the bill because I anticipated this would happen. That we said the condition shall be satisfied biennially by
Yes.
providing a landlord certificate or a homestead declaration.
That's right.
There's two options we could take. One would be, if we were trying to then say there are too many units in your place that are being used as non-primary residences, which is a short-term rental, not a rental longer than a month. That definition can't change on people. That's not, fair to their original agreements. If they're providing a landlord certificate or a homestead declaration, then we might say to the municipality or somebody, you have too many non-primary residences, and that might make the municipality have to pay back some funds, but you're not going to go to the individual property owner or renter, frankly, or whomever, and say, you need to pay back these CHIP dollars because you didn't provide a landlord certificate or and so you have to look in the aggregate. And what they're saying is in the aggregate, if you still have 40% primary residences, then you're meeting the spirit of the law. If we literally make them look in people's homes to meet the spirit of the law, that is not what we passed. And that is the challenge with Ways and Means continually trying to rewrite the policy and the language.
I think on that note, that is a good spot to end on for the moment. We will continue this discussion. If there are witnesses people would like to have on this for next week, please let me know. And thank you very much, John, for doing this so quickly.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Keisha. Thank you, Thomas. I think we seem to be together on this. And thank you, everybody else. This is great. And we'll go off like